Good evening and welcome to Virtual Talking Timber, coming to you live from Teagasc, Athenry. My name is Nuala Ní Latharta and I'm head of the Teagasc Forestry Development Department, and I'm your host for this evening. We have a very exciting lineup for the next hour. We go out to Conkeher's Forest in County Roscommon and we meet Con and his advisor. We go to the sawmill and then we come back to studio where experts from Teagasc and the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine answer all your questions. We're really looking forward to spending the next hour discussing thinning, harvesting and selling your timber. And you're very welcome to our studio, where we are joined this evening by our panel, Liam Kelly, Stephen Mayan and Seppi Hona. First of all, we might ask them to introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Liam Kelly. I'm a Forest Development Officer. I'm based in Mullingar and I cover the Midland counties of Laois, Offaly, Kildare, Westmeath and Longford. I also have a national role as Events Coordinator within the Teagasc Development Department.
My name is Stephen Mayan. I work as a Forestry Development Officer in the Northwest. I cover counties Donegal, Sligo and Leitrim. In addition, I also have a national forestry media role as well.
Good evening, Nuala. My name is Seppi Hona. I work for the Forest Service in the Department of Agriculture. I'm a district inspector. I'm involved in the day-to-day evaluation and assessment of forestry licence applications.
Our aim for the next hour is to provide forest owners with information to support their decisions around thinning, harvesting and marketing their timber. Please bear in mind that our focus this evening is on conifer thinning. We will be running broadleaf events later on in the year and we'll be telling you more about that in due course. The format for this evening is short videos and this will be followed by a studio discussion with our panel here. There will be a live Q&A session and you have the opportunity to type in these questions. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A button. So just type in your questions there and hopefully we'll get to as many of them as we can during the evening. So now, straight away, we go to Conkeher's Farm Forest. It's based in Ballinameen, County Roscommon. Con tells us how he established and managed his forest, how he's now preparing for a second thinning, and he discusses some of the decisions he has to make around this.
My name is Conkeher. I'm a livestock farmer in Roscommon. We diversified into forestry in 1996, planting 55 acres of Sitka spruce and Norway spruce. We also planted a small amount of oak and ash. In 1996, there was an awful lot of discussion on forestry. And I started going to open days and discussion groups held by Teagasc, and it looked quite attractive, the grants that were available for forestry. There was a guaranteed income from the forest for 20 years that you didn't have in livestock. That was one of the main reasons for going into forest. Played a very active part in the formation of the forest. Once the trees went in, we were always aware that your premiums wouldn't be paid if there were failures in the forest. And I went through it once a month, made sure that there was no failures, and if there were failures, to be replaced. First of all, we had to, of course, get our felling licence in place and then get roadways put in. Without grants and that, it wouldn't be possible for an individual to put roadways through forest or that without some form of grant aid. And we had to select our contractor, and we found that they did a good job. You can see today it's a fine forest. About 960 tonnes of thinnings came out of it. Quite rewarding, but you wouldn't want to be looking on money for thinnings. You can see it has improved the forest quite a bit now. Those trees would have improved by 2-3 inches since it was thinned. I am now preparing for a second thinning. We have our felling licence in place. There's maintenance to be done on roads, a bit of fill to be done on roads and vegetation to be cut back. I went into forests where there was forests being thinned. I made inquiries about some of the places you go in, you see the trees will be cut nice and close to the ground, and they weren't over, they didn't go in too greedy, and they took out the right timber. And that was the way you decide on the contractor. Yeah, it's very important to have confidence in the person you bring in. Teagasc being the main people, they have seminars and they have forest open days, and from planting to thinning. About 4 years' time, there'll be a decision made whether we're going to thin again or whether we're going to clear fell. But I'd have a few queries about the replanting. I think there should be something put in place to help farmers replant. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a lot of scrubland. You can see today it's a fine forest. There's very little trees down in it, and we're quite happy.
Thanks very much for that, Con. Liam, is there a need for Con and other forest owners to be careful when getting ready for thinning?
Yes, thinning should be always carried out where possible. All sites are different. Generally, you would try and carry out your first thinning when the crop is maybe 10 to 12 metres in height, which will help stabilise the site. First thinning with Sitka spruce normally occurs around year 15. With Norway spruce, it might be a few years later, maybe around year 20. Generally, crops will improve once you do carry out thinning, and they will always look better after it. On the screen, you might see a first thinning, a diagram of first thinning where every 7th line is normally removed and some selection is taken, also carried out. Subsequent thinnings is generally selective only, and therefore it's important that you choose the right trees. Once you carry out thinning, sometimes wind blow can be an issue, and it's important to take wind blow into account when you are carrying out a thinning. As the trees get taller, the risk obviously increases, especially on wetter or heavier ground, and especially if a thinning has been delayed. You normally thin 3 to 4 times, and normally thin every 3 to 5 years. 3 things to remember, I suppose: don't over thin or under thin. Don't take out the wrong trees when you're thinning. That will have a knock-on effect when you come to clear fell. And also, try and avoid the delayed thinnings. In Con's case, I would recommend maybe a light thinning at this stage. The site has done very well, it looks very well, but a light thinning probably would be the better at this stage.
Thanks, Liam. So from Con's video, we see that the timing of thinning is actually closely related to how well the crop is doing. We now go quickly back out to Con's forest, where Noel Kennedy, his forestry advisor, advises him and discusses the growth of his crop with Con.
Con, can you just look at it? Let's look at this tree here.
Yes.
See the gap here between this row of branches and that row of branches? That's how much that tree grew in 1 year.
That's amazing. That's about a metre.
That's nearly a metre, and it's consistently putting it on. So, like, this just shows how fast a growing tree the Sitka spruce is, but it's obviously extremely happy on this type of soil. And we measured this at around a yield class 26.
Yes.
At least a yield class 26, which is a very, very fast growing productive site. So that's really great news for you and the forest here in terms of future timber production.
Fantastic.
Liam, Con's is a very fast growing crop. How soon do you think it'll be ready for clear fell?
Yes, a lot of sites, if they're well managed, will be probably ready for, especially fast growing Sitka spruce, will be ready for thinning or clear felling around year 30. It's important to try and maximise the return at clear fell by having as much sawlog in the crop as at that time. Normally you'd aim for maybe up to 60% plus sawlog material at that stage. In most cases, you'll be trying to thin your plantation fairly regularly, as I say, every 3 to 5 years, and maybe if the crop will allow, maybe be left with 500 to 600 trees per hectare at that stage, with each tree being about 0.7 of a cubic metre. Delayed thinning can lengthen their rotation. In Con's case, I would think that there's a large number of trees there at the moment, and as I said earlier, probably carry out a light thinning at this stage. At the moment, there's about 40% sawlog in the crop at this stage, so you would like to add a little bit more percentage sawlog into it for the final crop. So I would say it'll be ready in maybe 5 to 6 years, and maybe ready for clear felling at that stage. That's if the crop will stay standing. If not, it may have to be felled earlier if extra wind blow starts to creep in. Normally, you'll be looking for maybe between 400 and 500 cubic metres per hectare coming out at the clear fell stage. Okay,
thanks for that. And Stephen, what should Con or any forest owner be looking for in a harvesting contract to make sure that their interests are protected?
It's very important that there's a written contract in place. And I would strongly recommend that people use the template developed by the Irish Timber Growers Association. It's a really good document, and it really does touch on many important points. For instance, one of the points that have to be addressed is, naturally enough, timber prices, the price that has been agreed. Because in the document, the price will be quoted and it will say what exactly is covered by that and in what format. It's really important for the owner to actually understand what those various elements mean. Just to give you a small example, VAT. As an unregistered farmer, you'll be paying a flat rate of 5.4%. As a registered farmer, you'll be paying 23%. But you also want to know, naturally enough, if that is included or excluded in the price that has been quoted. In addition to that, it's also very important that when a timber sale is done, that a deposit is paid to the owner, and that then you'll agree to have a scheduled payment in place. And then at the end, when the whole job has been done and all the timber has been removed, then a final balancing of the books will take place. So that is also very important. The other thing that should be mentioned in the contract is when the job will start. As far as possible, try to have the harvesting contractor start to work during decent weather, dry conditions, which is really important from an environmental point. But it's also important that a completion date is included in the document, because naturally enough, the moment that the tree is cut, it will start drying out. Therefore, it gets lighter and it may well have an impact on the price once the timber gets to the mill and gets weighed over the weighing bridge. In addition to that, it's really important that quite a few documents are included with the contract. I'm thinking of, well, first of all, the copy of the felling license, naturally enough. The harvesting plan has to be there. The insurance details of the various contractors involved. A safety statement, a very important document, because if a health and safety authority officer calls on the site and asks, can I see your safety statement? Naturally enough, you have to be able to produce that. You also must have a risk assessment in place, and it also you also must have a document to show the competence and the qualification of the various contractors and or operators in place as well. So those are the things, the most important things that need to be looked for in a contract.
Okay, thanks for that. And then moving on, Con thinks that his forest will be ready for clear fell in a short number of years. Does he have to replant? And he particularly wants to know, will there be any money available for him to do this?
Yeah, well, that's a bit of a mixed answer, because the answer is yes and no. Yes, he will be required to replant because it's a legal requirement to replant, part of the Forestry Act 2014. And no, as it stands for the moment, there is no financial support available for the replanting. However, probably the cost of replanting will be anything between 5 and 15% of the timber profits. So therefore, I really want to emphasize this point. It's really important that you look after your trees really well, because that means that you're maximizing your income, and therefore proportionally, the cost of replanting will be substantially less really. The one exception is really that there may well be financial support available if the owner is interested in maybe developing a native woodland, because in that case, the commercial conifer plantation may well be transformed into a native woodland. That should be discussed in really good time, and it is decided on a case-by-case basis. So that is important to maybe keep in mind as well, but obviously you must have a particular interest in biodiversity to do so. And then the final point that I would make about that is also that if the same company is involved in the harvesting and they'll also be doing the replanting, it's important that that cost is separate, marked in the contract as such.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, and then moving on, Con mentions the need for a felling license. Seppi, the department has responsibility for forestry regulations and licensing. What is the process and how long does it take?
Yeah, Nuala, well, basically, as Stephen alluded to, under the 2014 Forestry Act, any forest owner that wants to carry out any harvesting activities in their forest, they need a license from the minister. So that would involve the filling out an application form that can be found online, the production of a number of maps. In particular, I want to highlight the production of a good quality harvest plan. Stephen alluded to that also. So the harvest plan is basically a map of your forest, and it highlights specific environmental features on site that are important from our point of view when we evaluate the project. What are the environmental constraints? What mitigation measures does the forest owner propose, and any potential issues that may arise? So that's a very important document, and the quality of that can speed up your application process. Time-wise, you know, in the Act, the Minister aims to process a licence within 4 months from the date that it was submitted. So there is that time limit there, where we try to get through the licence application.
And I think some people might be waiting a bit longer at the moment. What plans are in place to speed up the licensing decision?
Yes, the department fully acknowledges the backlogs that some forest owners are experiencing at the minute. What we've announced this week is a project plan that aims to address the backlog of around 1,700 files that have occurred mainly as a result of our appropriate assessment procedure. And those approximately 700 files are what our ecology department, and they require specialist ecological input. So as part of this project plan that was announced this week, we aim to amalgamate our resources, or especially the cornerstone of it is the ecological resources that we're bringing in permanently, which are 6 full-time ecologists. On top of that, we've hired in contract ecological staff, 5, and we are recruiting currently 13 forestry inspectors. So as part of those resources, we'll be communicating with the industry, looking at applications, can they be refined, can they be improved, just to try and move them through the system. And we've also set ourselves monthly targets. So currently the ecology department is going through approximately producing 20 files a month. We aim to up that to 75 by August and up that to 200 by November. So there's a fairly ambitious target there, but we acknowledge the backlog and we're working very hard to address that.
So we'd hope to see improvements in the future.
Absolutely, yes.
Great. Stephen, just one last question. Con wonders, how does he keep himself informed? I mean, we're providing an awful lot of information here this evening. How would you advise forest owners to keep themselves up to date with all the changes that are happening?
Well, first of all, maybe talk to your local forestry advisor because we provide independent and objective advice. There are 8 of us around the country. So by all means, send us an email, give us a ring, text, and so on, and we're there to assist you and to support you. In addition to that, there's a lot of information on the Teagasc Forestry website, teagasc.ie/forestry. And on the website, you can actually also subscribe to our e-newsletter, because quite a few people tonight would have registered for the event tonight via that e-newsletter. So it's a great way to keep informed. And the other thing that I would suggest is that the Department of Agriculture has recently announced that there's a new 2020 knowledge transfer scheme available this year. And I would strongly suggest to forest owners to participate in that, because it is the format is a mixture of indoor meetings, and there are also many site visits, especially now because of COVID-19. Quite a few of the meetings would have been or will be brought outdoors, and it's a great way to get in touch with the many neighbors that you have who have actually forestry on the farm. And of course, you can also get in touch with us via social media.
So lots of ways there of keeping yourself up to date in relation to forestry. And do remember, if you have any questions here tonight, you can use the Q&A button on the screen there, and we'll attempt to answer as many questions as we can throughout the evening. Now we go back to the forest, where again we meet Noel Kennedy. Noel is in Con's forest and is discussing the steps involved in deciding to thin and ensure a good job is done, both environmentally and economically.
Con has a lovely forest. The birds are singing, and the strong colour reflects good health. You can almost sense the growth. And it's ready for second thinning. Second thinning differs from first thinning because all the trees to be removed are individually selected. So it's even more important to get the right thinning decision, to remove the right tree at the right time, at the right volume. But it has to be done sustainably, environmentally and economically. So let's see what you need to do to get the best outcome from second thinning. Thin on time. Our Sitka spruce grows fast. We thin every 3 to 4 years. Have a look at the racks in your forests. If you see the crowns across the rack beginning to touch, competition is setting in, so you need to thin. If we thin on time, we can keep that fast growth and fattening of those trees continuing uninterrupted. You need to know how your forest is growing, so you need to measure your trees. Diameters, heights, stocking rate. This provides powerful inventory information to assist with your thinning decisions. It also gives owners control and power with future decision making and timber sales. A system of thinning control protects your forest against the negative impacts of overcutting and undercutting, while maximising timber production and promoting best thinning practice. This is a healthy forest habitat. The birds are singing, and second thinning will encourage more plants and animals to make the forest their home. Protecting the forest during thinning is a top priority, guided by the principles of sustainable forest management. Growing large, top quality, high value logs to final harvest is what most forest owners strive to achieve, and it's what the industry wants. Many factors can influence final log quality, but we can control one of those major factors: how well we thin the forest. To wrap up, second thinning succeeds with good decisions, good timing, and good execution. Get it right, you and your forest and the environment are the winners.
So that was a very interesting video with lots of important issues raised by Noel. Liam, why should a forest owner measure their trees before deciding to thin?
Yeah, there is some simple rules of thumb that you might look at that may inform you that the site is ready for thinning, such as maybe on the first thinning, the crop might be 10 to 12 metres tall. Some of the lower branches are starting to die off, maybe up 2/3 of the way, or even at the second thinning, as highlighted in the video, that the side branches are starting to close in across the rack again, or the line that has been removed. But that only informs you that it's ready for thinning. Ideally, you need to know exactly how much volume or trees to take out. So the only way of doing that really is to measure your trees. And some of the main parameters we need are the average diameter. We use a DBH tape where we measure the trees at 1.3 meters above the ground. You normally measure up to 20 trees, so that will give you an average DBH. You need to put down a plot using various tape measures. We normally put down a 10 by 10 meter square plot, and you count the number of trees within that plot. So that will give you a stocking in that plot. So that's normally, if it's 10 by 10, it's 0.01 of a hectare plot, and you multiply that by 100. So that will give you a rough idea of the number of trees in the plot. Just then we have various tools and ready reckoners which help us provide details, such as the thinning ready reckoner, which allows us indicate whether the crop is ready for thinning, especially first thinning. So we have an example there on screen, and basically you need the DBH and you need the stocking. And for example, if the crop was an average DBH of 15 and there was 2,300 stems per hectare, it would indicate that that crop is ready for thinning, to carry out first thinning. So that's why then later on when you're doing the second or third thinning, there's different parameters that we use. We look at volume and maybe area, basal area. So there is different, but it's important to know what volume is coming out so you can make a right decision.
Liam, there's a question in here from Damien. What percentage of timber would be taken out in the first thinning?
In the first thinning, normally we take out between 1/4 and 1/3 of the trees, the standing trees. And normally we'd probably be looking that the trees would normally be looking for between 30 and 50 cubic meters per hectare to come out at that stage.
And how can you be sure that the thinning is actually done correctly?
Yeah, supervision is important, that you need to look at what trees are coming out. Generally, if you put down a plot, you'll normally be looking at taking out in the plot that you'll be taking out the poorer, weaker trees, the trees with poorer form. And then if there's groups of trees where there might be some good trees together, you have to remove some of them to allow the better trees to develop.
And just a quick question here from Joe Ward. What is a wrong tree to thin?
Well, the wrong thinning, ideally, the idea of thinning is that you're taking out the weaker trees, you're allowing the better trees more room to grow into. So by taking out the better trees day one, you'll be the crop will take longer to become mature. So it's important to take out the weaker, poorer trees day one and allow the better trees retain in the crop, because they have more potential to become better trees in the long term.
Okay, and Stephen, Noel discusses what influences the quality of the forest. Can an owner do anything to get better quality in his crop or her crop?
And the owner can do a lot. And really the owner, it's very much up to the owner, I think, because for instance, it probably sounds silly, but go for a walk. Get to know your forest. If you go for a walk through your forest, you'll learn very quickly what you see. And for instance, when you come across an issue, it's great that you would be able to do something about it. Simple example, for instance, a drain is maybe full of water. When you see that, you make sure that you unblock the drain. If you don't do anything about that, that issue may well become a problem. And down the line, you may well have a much higher risk of wind blow because of that blocked drain. So there's a lot to do, there's a lot to learn, get to know your forest, because then you also know what you're talking about when you're starting to talk to potential timber buyers. The other thing also to keep in mind, as Liam suggested earlier on, because in the video we saw that Con is getting ready for a second thinning. So that means that the road is already in place from the first thin. But it's really important to make sure that you can do your second thinning on time. And that is really important. So that means that you must make sure that your felling license is still valid, or if not, then you have to go and apply for one, and that you get it in time. Secondly, the roads, maybe they need a bit of a repair here or there. So again, do something about that. And also, those couple of years that you have getting ready for your second thinning, it will also allow you to identify and to build up a relationship with a reputable harvesting contractor. And then the other point, and I want to refer back to that because it's really so important, is to supervise the thinning. Because with the second thinning, it's all about selection. In the first thin, you're taking out a line. There's not really a lot of selecting going on, but in the second thin, it's really all about selecting the poorer quality trees, because you want to get rid of the poorer quality trees so that the better quality trees, you can leave them grow up to maturity, because the better quality trees means the straighter trees, the stronger trees. Taking them out in a second thinning, you're basically getting rid of the family silver. Okay. So you have to build that up.
Okay.
Can I add in there, just important probably to put in control plots so that everyone is aware of what trees is actually going to come out. So a control plot can be put in that therefore the contractor and the owner can identify what trees that both parties are taking out. So those plots can be put in, they can be put in across the site so that you can keep an eye on what thinning is actually being done.
Yeah, and the other thing I would like to add to that as well is that it's also a really good idea that when you're supervising, that you actually keep an eye on the timber loads leaving the site, that you understand the type of timber that's leaving the site, that you can count the number of lorries, and it's really important to have that personal supervision. Okay. Then the one thing that I would like to add about first thinning, it's mainly a line thinning, but there again, the owner can really add to the quality of the logs, or the quality of the trees, I should say, that the first thin is followed up by high pruning to produce knot-free timber. Okay, and add value to the crop. And add value to the crop.
Now, moving on, we could hear the birds singing in the video there, and Noel mentions the importance of good environmental practices in forest operations. What measures can be taken during forest operations to ensure that the environment is protected when thinning?
It's really important, and first of all, make sure that you adhere to all the conditions that are attached to your felling license. That is really important. Also, adhere to the environmental guidelines that are in place. Very simple. There's a whole suite of guidelines and conditions that contractors must adhere to. For instance, you're not allowed to drive a machine close to riverbanks. You cannot cross rivers. So you really must adhere to the harvesting plan. In addition to that as well, I'm a strong believer to thin early and to thin well, because the effect that has on biodiversity is absolutely fantastic, because suddenly you're letting in more light to the forest floor and you see all that vegetation develop on the forest floor, and that's really a very good sign. Then in addition, when you are harvesting, and especially in a second thinning, that can be a challenge, but it's really important to do so, and it's a very, very simple way to actually see the difference between a reputable harvesting contractor and, let's say, somebody who's just trying to cut as much timber out as possible. And that is where the harvester is putting enough material underneath the machine to provide a nice soft carpet to travel on, but that's what we call a brush mat, thereby protecting the soil. Really important. It takes time, but it's a really important element that needs to be adhered to. And then finally, I would also say, where possible, try to thin as much as possible during dry weather, and where or when conditions maybe deteriorate, maybe pause operations until conditions improve again.
Okay,
if I could just come in there, no, just something that was mentioned earlier on about supervision on site, about stocking and timber loads leaving, and we're talking about the environment there. Another thing to look at is, as you were saying, second subsequent thinnings, brash can be a challenge. So brash management on site, ensure that your extraction pads aren't getting degraded. They may need to move brash from other parts of the site into the main extraction route. Because, you know, we don't want to see a situation where the soil is getting disturbed, and even with 1 or 2 rain showers that can flow into water course. So we're getting into difficulties there. So that's another thing that forest owners should be aware of, and just keep an eye when they're doing their regular site inspections, you know.
Seppi, just there's a good few questions coming in here about delays. Enda is saying, why is there such a long delay in getting a felling license? He applied in March 2019, and I see John as well. He's waiting 1.5 years for a felling license. Now, you've probably answered it already, so if you want to just give a quick answer to some of those and the several other similar ones.
Well, I suppose the majority of those delays are to do with a revised appropriate assessment procedure that we've brought in. So basically, the appropriate assessment has to be carried out by all licensing authorities, and they have to do with the EU Habitats Directive. So as a licensing authority, the department have to screen all licenses that come in. That could be a road application, it could be a felon license application, or it could be afforestation. So that screening process basically involves examining all Natura sites. They're Natura 2000 sites, they're EU designations. There's 430 in the country, and a 15-kilometre radius around a site. Now, the 15 kilometres is we've adapted from the National Parks and Wildlife Service guidance document, and it's a standard, it's a licensing standard in Ireland and the UK. So we assess all Natura sites within that 15k. It may actually go beyond the 15k, but generally we keep it within the 15k unless there's a hydrological connection. And that may prompt us then to send a file to our ecology unit, or we may have to request further information from an applicant or a forest owner. So that then has developed into a backlog, as I've said earlier on. There's about 1,700 files in the backlog, but we are addressing that with additional resources, and we just are at that stage now where we have to deal with that backlog, and hopefully in the months, as we go on in the months, we'll be able to, we will have addressed them to a large extent, and we can move back into a better turnaround time.
Okay, right. We might just move on to our next video, and I suppose the purpose of thinning is to improve the forest and also to generate some additional intermediate income along the way from timber sales. And we'd like to particularly acknowledge Forest Industries Ireland for their collaboration in arranging the next element of the event. This year, they are represented by Sean Kelly, who's purchasing manager for Laois Sawmills, and he discusses what timber buyers look for when purchasing timber.
Hi, my name is Sean Kelly. I'm the purchasing manager for Laois Sawmills. We're based outside of Port Laois in County Laois. We have recently upgraded the sawmill and production line, and we're currently producing 200,000 tonnes of log annually. So here we have set out a number of log assortments for display. The pulp, this should be the main product coming from first and second thinnings. These are logs that are the lowest value to be removed from the wood. The logs are not straight, will have a high number of branches, be of low quality, and be smaller trees from the crop. Stake, there should be a percentage from all harvesting to minimize pulp. Straight timber between 14 centimeters to 7 centimeter diameter, cut in single or double lengths. Pallet is the product which will give the landowner the highest return from their first and second thinnings. However, if the thinning is carried out incorrectly, this can reduce the return from the crop in the future. Pallet needs to be straight and clean timber from 14 to 35 centimeter diameter. Sawlog, this is the most valuable product to come from the forest. Should be taken in third thinnings and clear fells, as the previous thinnings is used to remove the lower value products, which will in the end return the highest value from the crop. Log quality has a huge impact on sawn boards. These are a result of poor quality logs compared to clean boards over here. We can purchase timber in 3 different ways. Delivered into the yard, the owner can call directly to the mill and request a price for logs at the gate. The owner will pay the harvesting and haulage costs. At roadside, where the owner has harvested the timber, we will send our trucks to collect the timber and cover the cost of the haulage. Standing. When buying forest standing, we look at the crop to give a reliable valuation. We will discuss the operation with the owners and provide contracts before work begins. For standing sales, cost of harvesting and haulage are covered by us.
Liam, Sean discusses a number of timber assortments in that piece of video. You might just go through the types of prices forest owners might expect to get for these different assortments.
Okay, as we said earlier, first and second thinnings are carried out early in the crop, so you are really only taking out the lighter material. The better trees are retained, so that they have more potential to become sawlog timber in the long term. The usual products that come out of first thinning are either pulp, stake or pallet. And I was reading a recent article by Dr. Niall Farley, one of our researchers, where he carried out first thinning, and he said 60% of the thinning that came out in first thinning was actually pulp in that particular example. So there was 3 different ways of measuring. So we rang around there recently just to get prices, and I'm going to just give you the prices delivered into a mill. For pulp, the range is between 36 and 40 euro per tonne. And they are cutting 3 metre lengths, as Sean just highlighted. Stakes are normally cutting 1.6 metre lengths or 1.9 lengths, and they're normally delivered in at 45 to 50 euro a tonne, delivered into the mill. Pallet then is cut, as I said, at 2.5s or 3.1s or 3.9s, with 3.1s being the optimal size, but a minimum diameter of 14 centimetres. They are delivered into the mill at the moment at 65 to 75 euro per tonne. Now, remember, you do have to take out the extraction cost, the harvesting cost, and the haulage cost to the mills to achieve that. Normally, in the first thinning, the other option then is maybe standing. Normally, it's standing in the first thinning. There's normally about between 30 and 50 cubic meters per hectare coming out. If it's the delayed thinning, it might be more volume coming out, but normally standing price could be anywhere between 0 and 15 euro a tonne, with the average being 10 to 15. Second thinning, normally about 40 to 60 tonne coming out. If it's more delayed, there might be a bigger percentage coming out, and the average price we're hearing is anywhere between 18 and 22 euro a tonne standing.
Okay, so taking that information along with what we've already discussed, what would your advice to a forest owner be when carrying out a first thinning?
Well, the main thing is that in the first thinning is lines that are removed and selection. It's important that it's carried out early. Normally when the crop is 10 to maybe 12 metres in height. Should be done in good weather, as we said earlier on. The line has to be taken out anyway, but the selection is important, that you are taking out the weaker products to allow the better products to develop. So okay, it is important that you're taking out the weaker products and not the real good timber.
Okay, and just 1 or 2 little questions coming in here that might be helpful to answer. John asks, what does DBH mean? And we also have another question on where do you measure the DBH?
Okay,
quick answer,
yeah,
please.
The DBH is diameter of breast height. It's measured at 1.3 metres above the ground. And this is a DBH tape. They're a special forestry tape. They're about 20 to 25 euro to buy. Every forest owner should have one. Okay, and they're a special tape that measure the circumference of the tree, and it gives you the diameter at breast height.
Okay, and then moving on to Stephen, just another question that's coming in there. Ger there is saying that he has a 21-year-old plantation that hasn't been thinned, and we had another question there from somebody who has a 1991 plantation that hasn't been thinned. What do you say to these people?
The very first thing that I say is ring up your local forestry advisor. One of us will be more than happy to go out and have a look at it. We'll be able to advise. I would say at this stage the trees are too far advanced to consider thinning, because you can't go thinning way too late, because then you'll have a very high risk of wind blow. But what I probably would suggest that you let the trees grow on to maturity, and that you then fell the trees. There will be a slight difference. You'll have a lower total income, but it's better that you do not thin than you thin way too late and that half of your trees are blowing over, which obviously is not a very good idea. The other thing that I would say as well to those people is, if it's very difficult to be able to walk through your plantation, cut inspection paths. Okay. Access equals management.
Yeah, and then getting back to Cons Forest and other forest owners with similar type of forests, how should they prepare for a second thinning?
I suppose, leading on from my previous answer, inform yourself, naturally enough, get to know your forest, go for a walk, talk to your local forestry advisor, participate in the new, this year's knowledge transfer scheme. Great idea. And why not, as you're getting ready for your second thinning, why not learn a new skill? Mm-hmm. You know, for instance, Teagasc can put on workshops where you can learn how to lay down a thinning control plot, because Liam mentioned that it's really so important. Well, why not to learn how to do that? Learn how to measure your trees, because Liam has just demonstrated a DBH tape. Well, learn how to use it. It's really a good idea. And again, knowledge equals power. Then the other thing that I would suggest as well is that the second thinning, as we said earlier, will take place probably about 3 to 5 years after the first thinning. So clearly, how do you get ready? Again, and it starts sounding like a broken record, make sure that your felling license is in place, repair roads if necessary, identify a reputable contractor. And then one of the things that you really should do is, while you're getting ready to do your second thinning, is to understand timber prices. Because Liam mentioned there that the prices he quoted were delivered into the mill. And in the video, you also heard Sean Kelly say that sometimes they can arrange a standing sale. You can also have a roadside sale, or you could have a gate price. And naturally enough, in all those cases, the price will be different. Sometimes you may be measuring the timber by cubic meter, volume, maybe by weight, tons. It all has implications. And again, as Liam said earlier, stake is cut at a certain length, pulp is cut at a certain length. And again, you need to understand that. So that's really important to get your head around that you know that when you get talking to a timber buyer, that you know what people are saying.
Okay.
Yeah, just to add to that, we can put on tree measurement courses if the need arises. So if people are interested in attending the course, if they get in touch with us, we can arrange courses when there's sufficient demand.
That's great, and that preempts Ger had a question asking exactly that. So that
can I just come on there, Nuala,
yeah.
just to go back to the felon license part? Stephen was talking about the importance of applying for your felon license in time, but what we've also noticed that people applying for felon licenses, you can apply for a 10-year license now. But what we've often found is people are only applying for a 2 or 3 year license, even sometimes just for a first thinning. So what I would definitely advise people is look at your forest and look at it over 10 years. So if you can apply for 3 thinning operations, put that into your felon license so you don't have to come back in 2 or 3 years. Use the whole spectrum that's available to you to manage your forest and get your license in place. And then you have it for 10 years, and you can go on then with managing your forest.
No, that's really good advice.
And that requires a management plan with the application. So that's very
important. So you would go through your forest, you put in your plots when you're going to thin them. So you'll do your tin 1, plot 1, and this year, and then 3 to 5 years later, you'll do plot 1 again. So it goes on like that, and at least then you've got a bit of a work program there too that you can work to.
Yeah.
You know,
makes sense.
Okay, and Seppi, actually, just before we move forward, there's a few questions there on continuous cover forestry. Should we not, the general gist of several of the questions there is, should we not be just converting to continuous cover forestry? Have you any policies on that, or?
Well, we don't have a specific policy on it. We do have a scheme. We had a pilot scheme last year where people were given financial aid to people to convert some of their plantations to continuous cover forestry. But continuous cover forestry, we need to understand, it doesn't work everywhere. A lot of our forests are planted on wet mineral soils. Some are in exposed sites, you know, and wind is a problem in continuous cover forestry. So it will work in some areas, and there's an increased interest in it. You know, there's a couple of organisations in Ireland that are promoting it, and there's a lot of work going on. But it doesn't fit for every forest owner. But certainly look at it. Look at your forest with a professional forestry or with one of the forestry advisors. And they'll be able to talk you through the pros and cons specific to your plantation.
And it is important to get in early too if you're interested in continuous cover. So it is important to carry out it.
And then just getting back to some of the regulation there, Seppi, forestry is quite a regulated sector. There are some new regulations regarding the movement of timber. Can you explain the role of plant passports in the movement of timber?
Yeah, so in December 2019, new plant regulations came in, and to do with the movement of timber, for example, as one that's to do with plants and the movement of timber. But in the movement of timber, a forest owner now will need a specific plant passport for every forest load of timber leaving his forest. Now, the way it's working at the minute is that it's usually companies or the timber mill that is buying the timber are supplying those plant passports. But it is something that people need to be aware of, that each load coming from your forest and going to the processing location will require a plant passport.
Okay, and just generally then, I suppose we're all very conscious of pests and diseases and the times we're living in. In relation to timber supply, what measures are in place to protect our timber supply from pests and diseases?
So Ireland is known as a protected zone, so like a protected zone specific to 6 dangerous beetle species, if I could say so. So we're a unique situation that we're an island, but we also import a lot of timber and a lot of horticultural products. So there are a lot of checks on ports, and our ports especially, where we have timber coming in, where we've wood packaging material coming in, and we liaise with other authorities when, for example, wood packaging material comes in, and that needs to be inspected to ensure that it's free of debris or any organisms that may be a danger to our industry.
Okay, right. Thanks for that. We're now going to move to our Q&A session. Thanks to those of you who have asked questions, and we have lots of them in. We probably won't be able to get around to them all, but we'll try and amalgamate them, and hopefully everybody will get some feedback on the queries they've put in. And I'd appreciate if we kept the answers fairly short and snappy so that we could try and get through as many of them as possible. An interesting one in here on when would you decide to thin a mixture of Sitka spruce and Japanese larch? Stephen, maybe we might ask you that one if you're okay.
It says in time. Make sure that you have your inspection pads in place, measure your trees, the DBH, measure the height of the trees. I would say that if you have a mixture of larch and Sitka spruce, try to be ready to carry out the thinning when your Sitka spruce is between 10 and 12 meters in height.
Okay.
And larch at the same time can also be thinned, and you can thin larch very heavy.
And I'll ask you another one here while you have the floor. It's from Charles. If you do high prune, how much more would you expect to get for your timber?
Very good question. Reality is that more than likely you will not get much more for your timber. However, it will be much easier to sell. And that is important, I think, in the current market. It is more, I think, a question of being able to sell your timber well, rather than getting more money for it. And in addition to high pruning, I would also suggest make sure that you have records. Take photographs, maybe have an advisory site visit report, just to show that the high pruning did take place.
Can I just add there?
Sure,
I suppose
yeah.
it's important that you should maybe only high pruning the better trees, not high pruning everything after first thinning, that you high prune the final crop trees. And that way it can be a marker, it can identify your final crop, and each time you thin, you're thinning around those trees.
Okay. And Seppi, this is related to something, a comment you made earlier on. It's from Sean. How do I know is the brash mat enough, or where timber is being wasted?
Well, it's a bit of a balancing act, I think, because sometimes, it depends, especially in subsequent thinnings, you may need to, depend on the ground conditions, bury some, mainly pulp, to keep the machines up, because what you don't want is too much soil disturbance. If you start seeing fine sediment and muck coming through the brash mat, then your alarm bell should start ringing and saying, right, what am I going to do? How am I going to remediate this issue? It might be a localized issue, but it might, it's mainly the main extraction route and around the stacking area where the problem is. But that can invariably lead to other issues. It can run off, it can run into an adjoining water course. So I would really focus on, is there muck coming through the brash pad? And if it is, it needs to be replenished with even, brash taken from another part of the site with a forwarder. Contractors won't like doing it, but you need to be insistent on it, because you are damaging your soil. And as I said, it can lead to other things. It can run into a water course. And, there could be other issues going down the line then,
Absolutely.
Can I add something there? Because what Seppi is saying is absolutely true. It really makes a lot of sense to do that. In addition to when the thinning has been carried out, it's also important that the contractor will fix any blocked drains or where water is pooling or so, just to make sure that it can flow away. That's also very important.
And again, just add, as Stephen said earlier on, like if it's a damper site, maybe, choose your time wisely as well, not be going in there in wet times if possible.
Okay, another, I suppose, harvesting question. Stephen, if letting a sawmill harvest from standing, we saw the various options there in the video, in the nice video, is it not in their interest to over-thin?
It may well be in their interest to over-thin, but that is also where you are, where you have to do your job to supervise the operation, because also naturally enough the timber price has been agreed in advance. In the first thin, more or less, you'll be taking out lines. You'll be taking out one line in 7 and maybe a few trees on either side of the rack, which is the line where the trees have come out. And it is you that have to supervise that is the timber that is coming out. So that's for the first thing. In the case of a second thinning, it's definitely the case that you must make sure that the poor quality trees are removed. And as Liam has pointed out, and Seppi and myself as well, you must be able to lay down a thinning control plot, that the correct trees are removed, the right number of trees are removed, and of the right size.
And Seppi, an interesting question here from Thomas. Can you self-thin your forest? I presume, can you do the thinning yourself without a felling license?
No, you can't. If you fell any trees within a forest, you need a felling license.
And would there be I think there's a case maybe where they can fell a little bit for their own use or something like that?
Not in the forest.
Not in the forest, no.
Okay.
On a farm property, I think they can fell up to 15 cubic meters a year.
But not in the forest.
Not in the forest.
Just add on that, I suppose, from a health and safety point of view, if you are felling yourself, that make sure that they're properly trained and that they're using the proper PPE at all times. That's if they're felling individually themselves.
Okay, and Seppi, another question on licensing while you have the floor. This is from Charles. If you have a 10-year license, can you apply for your next license before the 10-year runs out, i.e. at year 8, therefore hopefully avoiding delays in the future?
Well,
this is a man looking into the future.
Well, there's a provision in the Act whereby when your license reaches year 10, say, you can apply for an extension for another 5 years without having to reapply. So you can just apply for an extension. So I can see where he's coming from in the current situation, but I don't think there's any need to worry about that. There is a provision in the Act where they can just apply for an extension for 5 years.
Okay, and then we might just come back to Stephen on this one. It's from John asking, what's the relationship between volume and weight? So they talk about volume in cubic meters and weight. Are they the same thing? Or I think you kind of maybe touched on it earlier on there.
Yeah.
The importance of it.
It's very much, there's a very big importance there, because when the timber is fresh, the weight of the timber is quite similar to the volume. Now, it does depend on the season, it does depend on the species and so on, but it's quite comparable, relatively comparable. However, the moment that you cut the tree will start drying out. And it will, well, relatively rapidly start drying out, and it will dry out 20%, 40%, 50%. So therefore, there's totally no correlation whatsoever between volume and weight anymore. So in a standing sale, it doesn't tend to be that important, because it's the contractor that is actually taking out the material and removing it. However, on the roadside sale, make sure that your trees are sold before the trees are cut, because then it's in the interest of the timber buyer to remove the timber roadside. If you try to sell timber from the roadside, I guess that the people moving the timber are very, very busy, and there may well be a bit of a delay before they can actually move the timber. So there is very much a relationship, a correlation between volume and weight, but it's all about the moment it's cut, it starts drying out, and you have to keep that in mind.
That's great. That's I think, good bit of advice there. A few questions coming in here on KTGs, Liam. Two of them. One is asking, how do farmers apply, or forest owners apply for KTGs? And the second one is, somebody who's already done a KTG, can they apply for this current?
Okay, well, first of all, the Forest Service or the department allow the KTGs, and they have recently have identified or appointed various coordinators to take on the KTGs for this year. Each coordinator is allowed to take on 20 participants. So over the next few weeks, they will be looking for participants. So as I say, there's seven meetings, 3 I think indoors this year and 4 outdoor as part of the KTG. So it's important to keep track and maybe keep in touch with Teagasc or the department over the next few weeks, because the list of appointed coordinators will be announced. Once you participate in the KTG, you can't take part for another 3 years. So it's once in every 3 years that you can only carry out KTG.
We're kind of getting tight on time now, so I'm going to try and squeeze in a few more questions. One here from an anonymous attendee, waiting for a felling license, a clear felling license, and getting frustrated, thinking of going ahead without a license? Is that a good idea?
Well, I wouldn't advise to do that. You know, bear with us. We know there's a backlog. We acknowledge it. We're trying our best in a very challenging environment to get through this backlog. So, you know, just touch base with maybe with your forester. If you have no luck with your forester, touch base with the felling section in the department for an update.
Okay.
And just stay tuned, and hopefully we can process your license as soon as possible.
And maybe in addition to that as well, I don't think a reputable timber buyer will be too interested in buying timber without a valid felling license being in place.
Okay, and Stephen, just one or two here on certification. Question, is plant passports the same thing as certification? I'm not quite sure where that's, and no, then Ken also looking for a little bit of advice on certification. So very short answer there, if you don't mind.
Certification is a kind of a quality assurance scheme. It's fairly similar to Borbia. You're basically saying that if you're participating in one of those certification schemes, that your timber comes from a well-managed forest. The markets nowadays really are looking for certified timber. And in Ireland, there are two main schemes, the FSC scheme and the PEFC scheme. And as the private forests grow, it will become more and more of a necessity to be able to export and to get your timber sold.
Okay, thanks for that, Stephen. A very short comment here from Donal. Biomass from the lop and top and forest residues, also a potential product from a forest, particularly after felling, and that could be considered by owners on suitable sites. So I think that's more a comment than a question. And again, a few more questions on felling licenses, but I think you've answered them as best you can here tonight. I suppose, again, let's see now, I think we're kind of getting tight on time. A few questions on insurance. Maybe Liam, would you mind just answering, should we have insurance to cover our forest from the time of planting, and what type of insurance?
Yeah, there's various insurance, both from day one. Early years you should have the insured against fire. You should probably have public liability insurance as well. And again, in the first few years, maybe most insurance can be for wind insurance up to year 20. I don't think many of the companies carry it after that. But I suppose if there's any contractor in on site, it's important to have your own public liability insurance.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Now, look, unfortunately, I think we've run out of time. This has gone very, very quickly. And maybe at this stage, before we go, I think we'd like to do some acknowledgement of the people who contributed to tonight's programme. I'd particularly like to thank conifer, whose forests we visited. We'd like to thank Forest Industries Ireland, who collaborated with us this evening, and particularly John Kelly from Laois Sawmills. Seppi Hona from the department, thanks very much for coming in and answering questions very well for us. And I'd also like to thank my colleagues, Noel Kennedy, who was the moderator here this evening, Liam Kelly and Stephen Mayan here in studio, and Declan McArdle, who pulled the whole thing together. I'd also like to thank our Teagasc PR department and the Connected department of Teagasc as well. I'd like to thank you, our audience. Hopefully you found this event useful, and apologies we didn't get to all your questions, but I think we got to a lot of them, or we touched on most of the issues that were raised anyway. We were totally oversubscribed this evening, which I suppose is a good thing, but unfortunate for those people who just couldn't get to sign in this evening. But the good news is tonight's webinar has been recorded and will be available on YouTube and on our website shortly. You can also visit our website, and you can contact us directly if you need any further information. And apart from that, all I need to do is thank you all and just say good night from us all here in Teagasc, Athenry.
Good night.